Shiuur before Pesach. Okay, so Boker Tov, everybody. So we are on Daf Kafrei Amud Aleph, Masechet Beitzah. We saw the Mishnah yesterday. We'll just read through it again very, very quickly. Be'mam sukenet lo yishchot elam ken yeshut bayom lechom mimena kazayit tzli. You have an animal that you're afraid it's going to die, and therefore you want to do the shchita, even though you've already had your Yom Tov meal, so you can do that so long as there's time to eat a roasted kazayit of meat from the animal. Rabbi Akiva Omer, afilu kazayit chai mi beit tavichata. The Gemara is going to talk about what this beit tavichata means. Yeah, and for now, we assume it means you're eating a raw piece of meat from the neck, from the area where you shechted. Okay, so says the Gemara now as follows. Amar Rami bar Abba, hefshet v'nituach be'olah. Says when it comes to the korban olah, we know that we have a din of hefshet v'nituach. This is Parshat Shavua, Vayikra. We're starting to get into the korbanot, starting to get into all the details. Truth is, we get through them very, very quickly. About 3 parashiyot in Sefer Vayikra, we're not talking about korbanot anymore. We're talking about other things, but nobody notices because everybody's decided Sefer Vayikra is all about korbanot and it's all very boring. Well, it's not, but and korbanot are important too. There's lots of things we can learn. So one of the things we can learn is this. It says an olah is a korban which nobody eats from. That's why it's called an olah. It's completely burnt on the mizbeach. Nonetheless, we have to do hefshet v'nituach. Hefshet is skinning the animal, and nituach is cutting it up to its different parts. So he says Rami bar Abba, hefshet v'nituach ba'olah. V'hu adin lakatzavim. That is regarding the olah, and it's the same thing. This is teaching you for the butchers as well. What's it teaching? He says, Mikan lamdat Torah derech eretz. From here, the Torah is teaching you derech eretz. It's teaching you proper conduct, that you should not eat. You should not eat from this from the meat until you've done the hefshet v'nituach, you've skinned it and you've cut it up, etc. You shouldn't be so gluttonous that you have to eat it all straight away and that you can't wait. So now, but the question is, when we say limdat Torah derech eretz, what does that mean? It says, "My kamashmalam." Ilema ilapuke mid Rav Huna, de'amar Rav Huna be'ema b'chaya b'chezkat isur omedet ad shivada lacha b'men nishcheta b'chezkat eter omedet ad shivada lacha b'men mitrfa. Right? So he says, the question is this. When we say here, limdat Torah derech eretz, does that mean Nimdat Torah derech eretz, meaning it's a nice thing to do, meaning it's a good thing to do, but it's not. There's no isur. It's not absolutely essential. Or are we saying no? It's more than just derech eretz. It's coming to teach you halacha that maybe there's a chashash treifa before you eat it. Again, what are we saying? You have to skin the animal and cut it up, and you'll be able to check the different parts. If we say you have to check the different parts, are we saying lafuke mid Rav Huna? Because what did Rav Huna say? Rav Huna learned as follows. He says be'ema b'chayah. B'chizkat isur omedet. When a be'ema is, we always have a chazakah, right? Which means that it continues in its current state unless we know otherwise. So when a be'ema is alive, its current state, its chazakah is that it's alive. You can't eat ever minachai. You can't eat a living animal. Therefore, it's considered asur until you know that it's been shechted and then it's been shechted properly, right? Be'ema b'chizkat isur omedet ad shivat alacha b'men nishcheta. Okay. Nishchata b'chezkat eter omedet. However, once it's been shechted, once you know that it's been shechted, so then we assume that it's b'chezkat heter. We assume that everything's okay, that it's kosher. That's the current state is that it's been shechted. Ad shivat halacha b'men trefa, unless you know that it's a trefa. In other words, we don't have to suspect. Okay, nowadays things get a little bit more complicated than this. But essentially, what is a treifa? A treifa is one of two things. Essentially, the definition of a treifa is an animal that would have died within 12 months, right? That's called a treifa. There's a din by a human being of a treifa as well. You're obviously not going to eat the human being, but that's different. But a treifa, as opposed to a nevela. Nevela is an animal that was not shechted, that just died naturally or other ways, was mauled by another animal. That's a nevela. A treifa is an animal, even though it was shechted, it had some sort of an illness or some sort of an injury or a lesion, that means it would have died within 12 months. Okay, and that would make the animal not kosher. Now there is discussion, Gemara in Chulin and other places give us a list of different treifot. So anything that appears in that list would make the animal a treifa. And the question is asked, certain things in the list where we know the animal could survive, or certain other things today where you know the animal will die, and those are not considered treifot. So that's a whole big sugya. I'm not going to get into it now. That's where Tosfot discusses. Now we have the principle of nishtanu hatzvaim. Nishtanu hatzvaim, which essentially means that during the time, there are those who say, and this is why how we deal with a lot of different stirot, maybe contradictions seeming between Torah and modern science. We say that whatever it says in the Torah, whatever it says in the Gemara, that would have been the reality in the days of the Gemara. Nowadays, at some point over the last few thousand years, things change. So even though the Gemara says it's a treifa, we still hold it to be a treifa, even though nowadays we'd say the animal could survive. Okay, but without getting into all of that, the point is that's what makes it a treifa. Now, if you know the animal was a treifa beforehand, obviously you can't eat it. If you don't know that the animal was a treifa, do you have to suspect? So essentially, what Rav Huna is saying is that no, so we don't know. We assume that it's kosher. Okay, now there are certain, and it's different when it comes to meat versus when it comes to chicken. And there are certain checks and certain things which we do nowadays once the animal has been shechted to make sure that it's not a treifa. Okay, but essentially Rav Huna says that we have a chazaka, right? So we assume. So when Rami Bar Abba came to teach me, it said derech eretz, but it was really more than derech eretz. So if we say that he means to say you have to do hefshet v'nituach, meaning you have to check the animal, otherwise we're concerned that you might be eating a treifa. Right, so again, I'll just read it again. He said, what is he going to teach you? If you say he's coming to exclude, you say he's coming to argue with Rav Huna, who said, and nishchata b'cheskat etel omedet ad shivda l'chavama nitrafa. V'hanantan matnitin kid Rav Huna. Didn't we learn in our Mishnah? Actually, we follow this opinion of Rav Huna. Didn't Rabbi Akiva omer afilu kazayit chaimi beit tvichata? Didn't Rabbi Akiva say that you could come and you could eat a bit of the meat from the neck, from that part of the animal? So clearly, if you can eat that, and that's before you're doing the hefshet v'nituach and checking it inside. So we assume that it is in a cheskat, it's a cheskat kasher, and therefore it wouldn't be absolutely required to the hefshet v'nituach. So, my love beit tvichata mamash. When Rabbi Akiva says beit tvichata, do we not mean the neck? Do we not mean the place actually where you've shechted? And says Rashi here on the bottom line. He says beit tvichata mamash kodem hefshet, right before you have skinned it. So says the Gemara, lo. Mimakom shetovechet achilata. So says the Gemara, no, that's not what it means. When we said beit tvichata, actually means the word litvoach is to slaughter, but it means makom shetovachat achilata, where it cuts up and chews and digests essentially its food. So it's talking about the inner parts of the animal, which is after you've done. Right? Rashi says, yeah, shetovachat achilata mibnei me'er, from inside its stomach. Shamachal mitchatech or mitakel sham. The food gets cut up and broken up and digested there. So we say, מה אליו מבית צביחתה ממש? לא, במקום שטובחת אכילתה, והתני רבי חייא, מקום צביחתה ממש. Okay, so Rabbi Chia says so we reject that. We say no. You can say that it's talking about the Beit Tvichata, but Rabbi Chia said no. When Rabbi Akiva said Beit Tvichata, he meant actually the neck. So Ella says the Gemara, Rami Bar Abba, Orach Ara Kamashmalan. In other words, Rami Bar Abba is not teaching us an absolute requirement, but he's teaching us Orach Ara, he's teaching us Derech Eretz. That's the proper way, that you shouldn't be in such a rush to go along and eat this animal, but it's not actually an Isur Treifa. Let's just see Rashi for a second. Let's go back. Rashi here at the bottom, on the Amud Aleph, Rashi here at the bottom says, right, Hefshef V'Nituach, פירוש הכתוב בעולה שהיא אכילת גבוה. We said Efshet v'nituach, the Torah said regarding an olah, which is achilat gavoa, which is consumed on the mizbeach. V'hu adin yesh lomod lakatzavim b'achilat hediot. And so too, that's how we have to learn for when human consumes the meat. Maika mashmalan, what's it going to teach us? Derech eretz or isur. Right? This whole time, are we talking about derech eretz? Are we talking about a prohibition? And it's coming to say that you can't eat from it until you have cut it up. Because you might find a treifa beseta that was hidden that you couldn't see before. And essentially that's the question. Do we have to assume that every animal is a safek treifa even if you don't know it? So we say which would be, right, if we were to say this, that would be going against Rav Huna. So here he says, Ever menachai omedet. He says, when the animal is alive, until you've had the shchita, so it's still, you have the chizka of isur of ever menachai. V'nafkamina, she'im ela safek b'shchitata, namidena al chizkata. What's the nafkamina? That of the fact that there was a chizka of isur, that means now if there's a safek regarding the treifa, regarding the shchita, I have to go by the chazaka. Until we know for certain that it was shechted properly, that only then it would be mutar. Once I know that it's been shechted properly, so then its chazaka changes to eter. According to Rav Huna, we say ordinarily animals are not going to be treifot. Right, like I said, again today things get complicated because there's all sorts of medicines and there's all sorts of injections and there's all sorts of production methods whereby there are certain things that we do have to check. This, incidentally, is one of the reasons why kosher meat is so expensive, because you have to do all sorts of things afterwards, and it's very, very labor intensive, and also because not all the meat can be used. Okay. For example, if you find there's a hole in the lungs, or in the inner parts of the animal, so he says, if we say that there's a chazakah that everything is kasher, and then afterwards we find a hole or something, we could say maybe that happened after the animal had already died, and retroactively it's still kosher. Ubakodem shchita v'leso hamidena cheskata sheita ba kodem shensa ba safek ze umuteret. Basically saying all goes according to the chazakah ad shivadalacha emet shehi trefa, until you would know, right? So that was the two sides of the argument, and at the end of the day we said that from the Mishnah, the proof of the makom tzvichata, we assume that there's a chazakah that it is not a treifa. We assume there's a chazakah is that the animal is kosher, and all this thing that Rami Bar Abba was telling us was because of derech eretz. So if you have a look at the top of Amud Bet, right, he said orach ara kamashmalan. Okay, that was how we concluded. So Rashi there says orach ara v'lo mishum isur treifa. All of this is not about a prohibition of treifot. This is about derech eretz, that you shouldn't eat it too quickly in a gluttonous way. Now Tosfot over here is interesting. Tosfot says at the top of the page, he says orach ara kamashmalan perish Rashi v'lav mishum isur treifa. He says when we say it's derech eretz, and then Rashi said, okay, and therefore it's got nothing to do with isur treifa. Tosfot says teima. He says you'll see if you carry on learning the Gemara, which of course Rashi carried on learning the Gemara, but says Tosfot, you'll see that actually it sounds like it's talking about there is an isur. Okay, we'll see that in a moment, but that passage from the continuation of the Gemara makes it sound like there is an isur here. So how do we resolve it? So it says Tosfot yesh lomar divadai leika isur. Okay, you have to say there's no prohibition here, right? That's the pshat of the Gemara as well. There's no actual prohibition. The misha nishchata hi omedet b'chezkat heter. Once it's been shechted, so then now it has the chazaka that it's a heter, that it's now permissible. Miu im nimtzei treifa le'achar she'acharo Unenash keshogeg v'lo ko'ones. Says now you can eat it. But what happens now if we find a treifa after you've eaten it? So he says, how do we resolve the fact that it starts off talking about derech eretz and then it sounds like it's so? He says it means that if you ate it and afterwards you found a treifa, that you would be punished. Like it obviously wasn't mazid, you thought it was kosher, but it's also not ones. It's not right. It's shogeg. It's shogeg. It's something in between. Shelo hayalo lemaher kol kach. So in other words, it's not prohibited, but the derech eretz is connected to the concern that you might inadvertently transgress. Okay. So now the Gemara brings a little bit of agarata to illustrate this point as well. With the orach hara kamashmalan kidetanya, yeah, as a brighter talking about how a person shouldn't be too hungry. They're not able to wait. It says lo yachal adam shum batzal merosho ela me'alav. So certain root vegetables, if you have a person has garlic or has a head of garlic or an onion, it says don't eat it from the head, rather eat it from the side of the leaves. Okay, if you eat it from the other side, people will think, oh, you're so hungry, you can't even wait until you take the leaves off and go and eat it. That's not appropriate. You look like a person who's all sort of gluttonous. I have to say today there's a whole industry, in advertising and social media. This whole thing about foods and people do all they can to make to feed the sort of appetite and make things. They make themselves act like gluttons. I don't know what Chazal would say about that whole industry, but we have to be a little bit more refined in the way that we approach our food. Okay. Similarly, when you're drinking a cup, you drink a cup of wine or whatever. So says the Gemara, don't drink the whole cup in one go. Right? That's drink a cup in one go. That's not appropriate. The im shatar is a galgaran. Again, it's a person who can't wait, who seems very, very gluttonous. Tanu Rabbanan, hashotek kosov v'atachadar is a gargaran. If you drink in one go, that is not right. Shnayim derech eretz. In two sips, that's okay. That's good. Shlosha migasei ruach. In three, that is already gasei ruach. That already seems sort of you walking around and you keep sipping all the time. The point is, whatever's the normal way of drinking. The normal way of drinking is in two. If you intentionally slow it down and intentionally keep walking around with this drink, so that will seem there's something also there that's not quite appropriate. Now, V'amar Rami Bar Abba, we quoted Rami Bar Abba before, so we bring another quote from him again. He says, Chatzuva mekatea raglehon dereshiyah. Okay, Chatzuva is a type of plant. I'm not sure exactly what it is, what the translation would be. Rashi says, yeah, Chatzuva, he says, Esev, it's a type of grass or it's a type of plant, sheshorashav nukvin v'yodin ba'omek v'en mitpashet litztadin klal. The point is that its roots go down, and they go down into the ground, and it stays in its place. It doesn't go encroach on the spaces around it. Right? That's why they would use it. They would plant this plant in between the borders of different fields. It's what Yeshua used to plant in Eretz Yisrael. So he says the Gemara, this plant, this will, figuratively speaking, cut off the legs of the wicked. Right? So it says Rashi, those who are stealing and they are encroaching on the borders of others, they should have taken Musa from this plant, and they didn't learn from it. So it's a bit like, we have a Gemara in Eruvin as well, relatively well known, which talks about different animals that could have taught us derech eretz. As if we didn't have the Torah, so you should have looked at nature and you could have learned sniut from this, and you could have learned to be hardworking from this, and you could have learned different qualities from nature, from animals. So Yatu says the Gemara, you could learn these qualities from plants. Okay, so that's the first case. Second case is Netiya mekatea ragleon de kitzbaya. So this one is interesting because this is not actually the plant itself. It's the din of Netiya. What is the din of Netiya? Says Rashi, Netiyat Olah. We know we have a din of Ola. Shema Torah lamtin shalosh shanim milechol perot. You have to wait the first 3 years to, and really in the fourth year there's certain restrictions as well. But fruits that grow on trees, right? The first 3 years are considered orla. Orla is a very, very severe prohibition. It's actually more severe than certain other prohibitions. You can't eat it. You can't get benefit from it. It has a higher ratio of nullification than other things. Okay, so from the din of orla, this is going to cut off what? This is what Tosfos was referring to before when he said that it seems like there's an isur. Right? He says, "And nitiyah mekater ragleon de katzbaya." It's going to cut off the legs of the butchers, meaning people who are going to go and are going to cut. This is the connection to our sugya as well. Aside from the fact that it's just Rami Baraba, those people who have the meat and want to eat it straight away and they can't wait. They can't wait until you've done the Fshet v'nituach. Okay, so what are you going to say? You're going to say we had a din of Netiyah. We had Orla, which you had to wait for 3 years. You can wait a few minutes. You meant to wait 3 years. Now, like I said, this is different because the one before and the one that's coming after is telling us that there's a certain plant which teaches us in its way, derech eretz, right? Certain phenomenon in nature, or like the Gemara in Eruvin, there's certain animals which teach us. Yeah, we're not learning from any plant itself. We're learning from a din in the Torah. So maybe it means to say that people keep. I don't know. It's an interesting comparison. But it's saying that from this din of nitiyah, so that's going to be right. The fact that you could have kept orla, you could have waited 3 years. So why can you not wait for this? So he says nitiyah mekadar raglion de katzbaya u'deboalei nidot. And this is also going to be a rebuke for those people who are boalei nidot there as well, who are not able to wait. In the same way. By the way, that's the connection to the time of year as well. The Yerushalmi that talks about eating matzah on Erev Pesach. It uses a very strange analogy. It says anybody who eats matzah on Erev Pesach is kaboel arusato beit chamiv. It's like somebody who has like relations with his fiance. Of all the things to compare it to, that you're eating matzah on Erev Pesach. The point is, it's something that you have to wait. Something that you have to wait for. You have to wait until it's appropriate time. If you're doing it before the appropriate time, that is it's showing that you're unable to wait in that way. As we know, this year it's a little bit more complicated because of Erev Pesach is on Shabbat, and we have to have Sudah Shlishit, etc. So. As we discussed in one of the previous shiurim, not the Gemara shiur, but we discussed the shiur on Sunday. So Ashkenazim really ain't kol kach ma lasot in terms of washing for Sudah Shlishit on this Shabbat. For Sfaradim, you could have the egg matzah, the matzah shira, and that's fine. Right? When we say you can't eat matzah erev Pesach, we mean the matzah with which you can fulfill the mitzvah of Leil HaSeder. If it's egg matzah, which you cannot fulfill the mitzvah of Leil HaSeder, so that's fine. And therefore, for Ashkenazim as well, you'd be able to use egg matzah for the Shabbat night meal and the Shabbat morning meal, right? But not for Sudah Shlishit, because Ashkenazim we hold that there's a chashash of chimutz when it comes to matzah shira. So the Sfaradim can eat matzah shira for Sudah Shlishit as well. What do the Ashkenazim amongst us do? Which is most of us here. So we can't have a motzi for Sudah Shlishit, right? And malasot. We can have kaneidlach and other things, and then we can say mazonot and shakol, etc. Okay, but and then there's one more. There's one more statement that goes along with this. It says Tulmusa mekatel aglein desonen shel Israel. So there is a type of a bean or lupine, I think it's called in English, called a tulmusin, which is very, very bitter, and it needs to be cooked 7 times. Only after it's cooked, each time it gets a little bit sweeter, and once you've cooked it 7 times, only then it's going to be edible. So from this bean or whatever it is, it says Makatera glenda sanayan shel Israel. Sanayan shel Israel is a euphemism. Whenever we talk about the Jewish people in very, very negative terms, we don't want to say it directly. So why? Because Shenemar, we have the pasuk in Sefer Shoftim talks about when the Jewish people were doing wicked things. ויוסיפו בני ישראל לעשות הרע בעיני השם. ויעבדו את הבעלים ואת השטרות ואת אלוהי ארם ואת אלוהי צידון ואת אלוהי מואב ואת אלוהי בני עמון ואת אלוהי פלישתים. 7 different times, 7 different instances there of worshipping Avodah Zarah. ויעזבו את השם ולא עבדוהו. And they left Hashem, they forsake him and did not worship him. ממשמע שנאמר ויעזבו את השם, אני יודע שלא עבדוהו. From the fact that it says that they left Hashem, I don't understand, I don't know. They didn't serve him. Ma tamud lomar lo avduhu. What's it coming to teach me when it says that? Amar Rabbi Elazar, אמר הקדוש ברוך הוא, אפילו כתולמוס הזה, ששוקין אותו 7 פעמים ואוכלין אותו בקינוח סעודה, לא עשאוני בניי. So he says, it comes to teach you that it's the rebuke, that we couldn't even be like a Thomas. The Thomas, you have to cook it 7 times, but eventually it comes right. Even that we were unable to do. So that is the rebuke over there. Immediately after this, by the way, the Gemara is going to go and it's going to say that this stubbornness that Bnei Israel have, so it works to our detriment, but it also works to our benefit sometimes. Because the fact that we are a stubborn people, that is why we are able to keep up ultimately and to continue serving Hashem despite all of the obstacles that we have had throughout our history, which you may have noticed. It's very interesting when it talks about after Chet HaEgel, and it talks about the fact that we're in Am Kshei Oref. If you look closely in the Psukim, you will see that there are Psukim where essentially it says you should forgive these people because they are a stiff-necked people. I thought we were being punished because we're a stiff-necked people. And the answer is that the Kashut Oref is just like any other midah. It can be used for bad and it can be used for good. When we use it for bad, unfortunately, we use it for very, very bad. But when we use it for good, then we can have very, very positive things that can come from it. Okay, so we'll stop there. Adkan. Thank you, everybody. And I hope everyone has a Chag Kasher V'Sameach. And at some point after the Chag, we'll resume. We'll let you know when. And we'll carry on. Wishing everybody well.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good luck, everybody.